I'm Richard Wood, the Opine editor for the Gaudie, and this is our very first Opine debate on camera. Today I'm joined with Jamie Smith, a third year history student, and Jonathan Waddle, a second year history student. Today we're going to be debating 0-hour contracts. Jamie will be debating against them, while Jonathan will be debating for them. We will first start off with each member of the panel making a 1.5 minute statement about their argument, and then rebuttals, and then we'll get questions from the online audience. So yeah. Right, okay.
Okay, then shall I start?
Yeah, so, right.
Okay, so
Wait.
0-hour contract seems to be ideal for students and other people in part-time employment, but for people in full-time employment, it can be quite a serious problem. I mean, for example, Sports Direct, out of the 20,000 employees, 17,000 of those are on 0-hour contracts. They can't all be students people in part-time employment. At least some of them have to be in full-time employment. And the problem with that is managers don't have to give people shifts. They can give people shifts when and if they want to. So say if you're an manager of like a Sports Direct and you don't like an employee, you don't have to give them any shift at all. If that employee is in full-time employment, that's a serious problem. And another issue with that is if the exclusivity clause the Sports Direct does imply, that employee can't go and find work somewhere else, which means if they're in full-time employment, either they quit Sports Direct and try to find somewhere else, which can be stressful if that's the only income they're getting, or they can just try and stick out and hope they get more shifts. Neither of these situations is ideal, which is why 0-hour contracts need to lose the exclusivity clause. And I think managers should have to ask employees to work at least a few shifts a week. The employers don't have to take those shifts. They should be given the opportunity to take them.
Yeah,
okay,
that's fine.
That's my argument.
Jonathan?
I believe 0-hour contracts afford an awful lot of flexibility that is important to employees and employers. I've been in thousands of, not thousands, but lots of 0-hour contracts myself. I can think of 3 different jobs that were entirely full-time, where I wasn't on any contracted hours. But the reason the employer gave me that is that they needed the flexibility. They also needed an employee. An employer's not just going to take someone off and then not give them any hours, because that's why you hire someone. If you need staff, you're going to hire them. I don't want to go down like this full market argument, but that's exactly how the nature of work is, and that's why you'd use a 0-hour contract. Now, I agree with Jamie that he says we need to get rid of exclusivity clauses. But I mean, you can't just say that you need to get rid of that one part of them when you're arguing against them entirely. What they do for employees is offer an amount of flexibility that is entirely crucial to a lot of people. And as studies have shown, most people in 0-hour contracts are entirely happy with the level of work that they have, consistent with the average worker, but also much more happy with the beneficial flexibility they have between their work life and their social life. That's something we shouldn't get rid of entirely. We have many different types of contracts when it comes to employment. 0-hour contracts are just a very small part of that dynamic. And they work for an awful lot of people. They've worked for me, they've worked for other students, and they work for people outside of education in the sphere of single parents as well. That's something I wouldn't like to give up. They can be reformed. We can get rid of exclusivity clauses. I agree with Jamie on that. But that doesn't mean we need to get rid of them entirely.
Yeah, so we're going to go into the rebuttal section, and Jamie, can you attack Jonathan's points? Is there anything you disagree with him on particularly? What?
Okay, I would argue that the managers don't have to give all their employees shifts all the time, because a lot of these stores will hire more employees than they actually need to make sure all the shifts are covered. That does mean some employees will miss out on quite a lot of shifts. Like, you might be in full-time a lot of the time, but maybe other employees at the store weren't in full-time employment. They can be getting maybe 1 shift a week, 2 shifts a week. Either way, they would be missing out.
Does that not mean management's more responsible for it than the nature of the contract?
Management would be responsible for it, but that's implemented into 0-hour contract, because the 0-hour contract makes it possible for the management to do that in the first place. Whereas with a standard contract, the management would not be able to do that.
So how do you
They would just have to give them shifts.
So how do you account for the majority of people who are on 0-hour contracts being entirely satisfied with the level of work they have?
The majority of them are, but that also leaves a minority who aren't. And obviously in an ideal world, everyone would be happy. Yes, there's a minority that aren't happy, but I still think that can be fixed.
But the studies show that they're consistent with the average worker. So no matter what contract you're on, people are going to be happy or unhappy either way. Is that not just a natural part of work? Is that not just how it works? I mean, that's what the studies have shown.
I guess you could argue that, yes. Although I think in 0-hour contracts are more people who are unhappy than in standard contracts just because they're not getting work. Whereas in standard contracts are unhappy for other reasons, which can be fixed with that company and the manager. Whereas if you're not getting work, that's a serious problem.
So you agree then, basically?
Basically, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Basically, guys, you're both against the exclusivity clause. Is that the main thing that both of you
That's
are against?
my main problem
so
anyway.
You are against it mainly because of that, and you're for them apart from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, we're against the exclusivity clause. Now, Jonathan, do you want to rebut Jamie's points?
Well, I think you've made my argument for me in the large part of that. The problem you have is with exclusivity clauses. The majority of people who are in favour of zero contracts are for it because of the flexibility. If you have an exclusivity clause that doesn't allow you to work for someone else to take shifts with another company, that removes that flexibility that we're all in favour of. So if you get rid of the exclusivity clause, if you introduce a level of zero contract that allows the flexibility for the employer and the employee, and like gets rid of that altogether, that exclusivity clause altogether, to allow people to get even more flexibility, even more mobile and sort of fluid in their work, then that's much better. But if you're not going to argue against them altogether or any kind of principle that you don't have the minimum level of hours, then I'm not entirely sure what case you're trying to make.
So what was your last point again?
Like largely that you agree with me. If it's only the exclusivity clause that you've got a problem, well, that's most people who are in favour of zero contracts are in favour of getting rid of exclusivity clauses because they're in favour of the flexibility that the exclusivity clause.
Okay, I'd argue that in that case, I think managers also have to make sure the workers do get some shifts a week. At least some. Like, I get most people do as it is already, but I think it should be down in law that they have to give them at least some shifts a week. Because I know people who have gone like weeks without being called back by Sports Direct.
So I've got a question here from an anonymous tweet online. The Gaudie has Twitter. You can follow us at the Gaudie. So basically, this is a question. What would you say to someone arguing for exclusivity clauses and the argument that they benefit employers, as the employers will know that the workers are guaranteed to work for them and they can't just say, oh no, I can't do this shift, I'm working for someone else? What would you, seeing as you're both against exclusivity clause, what would you say to the argument that it benefits the employers?
I'd say the first concern shouldn't just be the employer, but the reciprocal process you have between the employees and the employer. They need to have both a level of flexibility. If the employer is going to have the right, as Jamie points out, to be able to not give them any hours one week, then the employee also needs to reserve the right to say, well, I don't want to work for you this week. And it has to be something that's beneficial to both. By getting rid of exclusivity clauses, that flexibility is afforded to both the employer and the employee, and not just the employer alone.
Would you agree with Jonathan?
I agree, it's a very practical attitude to have, to expect the worker to work for you and not give them any shifts. And not allow them to go and find work somewhere else.
Although you're on different sides of the argument, you agree that the main problem with zero-hour contracts is the exclusivity clause. Is there anything else you want to add?
Maybe me and Jamie are bridging the gap between debate, and we're actually, instead of just arguing with each other and having no conclusions, we're debating and finding something that we can actually agree on and solve the problem with.
Ground. I agree.
Also, we've got a question from our live audience member.
Hi there. The sociologist Guide Standing identifies that there's a new class emerging called the precariat, and they are usually found in these kinds of zero-hour contracts. Would you think that that leads to a more insecure world, a world where people simply can't identify who they are because they have all these different jobs? Everything is very chaotic. What would you say to that?
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It very much depends on the actual nature of the work that they're doing and where they're going to be going with that. Not having a class identity is not the worst thing in the world. I mean, if we look historically, class is very much a restriction on society. I mean, what defined you is that the working class couldn't become middle class, the middle class couldn't become aristocracy or upper class. So to have like different sort of pockets of society defined by what work they're in isn't exactly a new concept, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that just because you're in a very fluid or mobile type of work means that you can't identify with someone else. It can be very much self-identified. It can be very much you can move into another society sort of pocket if you want to. I don't know if zero contracts deliberately or even inherently put someone into this sort of, I'd guess by the sort of tone of the discussion that would be a sort of lower class. I don't believe it would do that. I also don't think it would be necessarily exclusively a bad thing if there were many different types of class emerging in different sort of sections of the workforce that were identifying in different ways.
You don't believe that this is fostering insecurity at all?
No, not at all. I mean, I'd say it's a possibility and it's a concern that should be raised, but from the studies we've seen already from like the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, we've seen that the majority of people are very happy with the balance of work they've got. It's consistent with the average worker, regardless of what contract they're on. And if anything, they're actually much happier because the balance they've got between their work life and their social life is aided by the flexibility that they've got. So I'd say, I mean, it's an interesting concern, it's an interesting idea to go through, but the studies show something different.
I'd agree. The system with social class is a very British phenomenon. I think it's good we're finally kind of moving past that. it's good. Class is a lot more mobile these days, I think.
Thanks very much for listening. You can find more about Granite City TV on their YouTube channel, which you're probably watching this through on the Gaudie website at the moment. And later on, you can vote on who you think won the debate. Thank you very much.